Who was your coworker from hell? I had a 50-year-old colleague who would message women on sugar baby apps and rub one out over his trousers. Saw him blow his load in the open office. He sat next to me. Kept on happening, reported it. He said he had a genital rash, but admitted to messaging people on social media. I got in trouble for my accusations. Fast forward 8 months, he's sitting opposite me now. He starts rubbing one out in the open office again. I recorded him. Showed my manager, and he was finally fired. He was a cunt too. Till people openly masturbate. I feel so dirty. Never understood the office masturbators. Like really? You can't wait until you get home or at least go use a bathroom? He told the general manager that he might be a bit late for a shift due to his second job. When the GM reluctantly said okay, he apparently took this as thinking he had free rein to come and go as he pleased. He'd show up anywhere from 7:30 to 8:30 for his 7 o'clock shift. Then when the doors closed he'd insist he had to head out and he had an early morning the following morning, leaving everyone else to do the closing work. He also had other issues like being rude to customers and other employees. People mostly kept quiet until one day a higher level manager had to sub on night shift. When he went to leave early and the rest of us with the work, the manager flipped, "If you lay a fucking finger on that money before this work is completely done, don't bother coming back." The guy insisted he had permission and left anyway. When our GM returned and he tried to come back, our manager said, "You warned me you were going to be late one time, and I never once gave you permission to otherwise start late or leave early. Clean out your locker now." I knew a guy like that. Came in late his second day on the job. Left before the work was done most days. Finally got fired for it. Give them an inch and they take a mile. We had a sysadmin who would come to work and run his real estate business from his desk while he was supposed to be working. The whole time coughing and sneezing and sniffling constantly. We called him Mitchie. He would also call friends and family and have hours-long conversations with them while we all had to listen. He picked up the nickname Thanksgiving Dinner Guy for using the break room, full kitchen, to cook entire meals that wouldn't be out of place at a family gathering. One of the offices in another wing had a sheet by the door for people to log when they saw him and what he was cooking that day. He didn't like any of us, the feeling was mutual, and left books like jerks at work on his desk. When he finally got fired, they found out he never did any of his sysadmin work. No backups, no password changes, no log monitoring. When he finally got fired, they found out he never did any of his sysadmin work. Honestly, sounds like your company is incompetent too. How long was he in the company before getting fired? I worked shifts. Can't go home unless I passes my reports to the next person. One particular bitch loves coming in late. Not 5 or 10 minutes late, I'm talking 25 to 30 minutes late. Best part, she loves bitching about how everyone is always on her ass for coming in late. She literally lives 5 minutes walk away from work, so no one knows why she's always late. Go get her ass. I work fast food and we had a guy like this. Lived 5 minutes away and would consistently be 30 minutes to an hour late. Was late so much that we started to schedule him, and an hour later, still came in late. We started betting on what time he would show up because he was late so much. He was in his 50s, had often uncontrolled diabetes, was 6 feet 4 inches tall. I was 24, and a foot shorter. Normally he was a teddy bear, but when his blood sugar got low he would get violent. He tried throwing punches at me for suggesting he get a Coke from the vending machine in the hall. Good thing he's slow and clumsy in that state. When we were in the truck together once, and it started making a weird sound, I wanted to take it into the shop and he insisted we didn't need to by yelling at me and pounding his fists on the dash, but we were going to a remote area and I didn't want to have to try and find help if the truck broke down and the radio didn't work. I had to call search and rescue on him once because he didn't come back to the truck after doing a transect biology job. You guessed it, he had low blood sugar and was not able to find his way back to the truck. He had no education or experience in biology, but he just couldn't be fired from his job driving a plow. With his propensity to let himself get hypoglycemic, he couldn't drive either. So they shuffled him to the wildlife department because he had an interest in wildlife. I was basically his babysitter. Would he be remorseful once his blood sugar got back up? This was a person that was in the aircraft qualification training squadron at the same time as me. He wasn't an intentionally terrible person, but his lack of self-awareness made any interaction around him difficult and exhausting. He washed out of another flying career field. In the first Sims, before the flying phase, he refused to use established procedures, resulting in degraded ability to provide required data to external players. Managed to fail his first instructional ride, despite it being nearly impossible to fail if you show up. He could not figure out how to take leave, despite several people walking him through the process. Rather than trying to solve any problem, he would announce it to the rest of the room, and if no one jumped in to help him, asked the nearest person. He managed to frustrate and time Jack, the kindest instructor I know, because he didn't have a basic understanding of a training airspace. In a bid to get back to more pressing, and more likely to be completed, tasks, he gave me an apologetic look as he suggested that Lieutenant Pube Spotter was a smart student, and could probably help him get up to speed. I could not. Canadian Air Force here. The number of horrendously inept people I've dealt with over the past 10+ years is amazing. One kid I worked with met a girl, got married and divorced within a year of joining. Refused to wash himself regularly. He walked around with greasy glasses. Like, his everyday glasses were smeared with weeks worth of finger grease, and dandruff and skin flakes form his dry, dirty skin. It wouldn't have been so bad if he knew how to do his job, which a trained monkey could do, but this kid couldn't. He also got his mother to move in with him in military housing to help him with housework and bills. There are a lot of great people I've worked with /for. But the bad ones really make you question why you try so hard when you could be shit and still get by. When I was looking at an aviation MS, a family member did me a huge favor and set me up to chat with 4 aviation guys. 2 Navy, 1 Air Force, 1 Luftwaffe. They gave me a bunch of advice and regaled me on their stories as pilots do in a group. The Luftwaffe guy had a washout in his squadron after the trainee found out he was being assigned to a Tornado instead of an old MiG like his dad, an East German, had flown and the trainee wanted. I still remember the family friend laughing in his accent because the recruit assumed the statue in front of the base meant the Germans had that plane there and was so combative they transferred him out of the program. The 50-something turd that was the owner's son, spoiled brat, reminded me constantly who he was if I stood up to him. Creepy as hell too, could never just tell any of the women they looked nice, actually told me one day that my legs looked nice. I was wearing a skirt. That was the last time I wore a skirt to work for a long time. I immediately started looking for a new job within a month. There were so many other things that occurred. I was turned off from working for a small family-owned business since. The small business tyrant, a common archetype. I'm picturing a 50-year-old John Rolfio. She told our boss that she wanted to break into my apartment and touch all of my stuff because I bet it's all really cool. This was right after I found out she'd moved into the apartment next door. She would send stuff to my apartment just so I would put it on her stoop and knock on her door. That is major creepy stalker moves. How long were you stuck living next door to her? That has the vibes of someone who wants to wear your skin, WTF. She was a lady in her 50s. We worked at a DRS office. Nothing was ever her fault, she could not take even the nicest constructive criticism, and constantly complained about everything. One of my nicest co-workers ever, who was around the same age, so not an ageism thing, often was the recipient of her blame, and because she never took responsibility, it was regularly the same issues she never learned to correct. They bickered a lot after a couple years of this. One day the nice co-worker went to the car to grab her anxiety med, and the obnoxious one went to the office manager and then HR, saying she thought the nice one went to get a weapon to hurt her. Like what? She didn't even own a weapon? And the nice one got fired. I was absolutely shocked. Any lingering respect I had for her was gone. I've had a lot of jobs and met some shitty people, but she was the most stressful nightmare who could boo-hoo her way into getting pity parties on cue. It took me way too long to figure this out. The hyper-complainers are constantly in the boss's ears about any and everything they thought they could use to stand on other employees in their ongoing efforts to make themselves look good. I've never worked for a business owner that was stupid or inept, and I was sure that they could see right through the lazy, corrupt constant complainers, and recognize them as the drag-on business that they were. But without fail, time after time, the one talking all the shit got away with their destructive behavior. They'd run off hard-working ethical employees as quickly as possible, while protecting the worst employees, many of whom were thieving the company, the customers, and their co-workers. It was a horrible thing to learn that whoever talks the most shit to the owners always won, and stayed on to embezzle their way to retirement. The absolute worst was a guy I worked with for nearly a decade. He was a monster, prone to fits of rage that included throwing chairs, monitors, and knocking over large, shelving racks where expensive merchandise was stored, while belittling his department employees as though he were a fifth grader. I always knew that one day, the owner would recognize how shitty a human being he really was and send him packing. I left the company after a decade but stayed in touch with the owners and other managers as I felt we were friends. I stopped at that old store to visit a decade after I left to hear that they finally fired the guy. He had embezzled a couple $100,000 from that business in the course of the 20 years he worked there. The real insult hit when the owners came up to talk to me and said we had to fire so-and-so when we discovered that he'd stolen nearly $250,000 for us. Can you believe he would do such a thing? My response cost me every friend that I had at that business, because I said hell yeah, I believe he'd do that. It was right up his alley, and he could not have displayed his disdain for you and your business with his complete lack of respect to everyone here and his profound lack of ethics in any aspect of his life whatsoever. I just hate it that it took you 20 years to see who he really was, while everyone that worked for or around him could see how shitty he was in 3 weeks or less. I just couldn't feel sorry for them, or feign sympathy/shock at how he betrayed them. I even gave them a quick count list of nearly 50 employees that left the company because of his BS, and noted that you were/are very angry at those that went to become direct and formidable competitors. I mean, it's easy to compete when you don't have to cover that guy's losses all the time. Whenever someone is talking mad shit to the bosses or other employees, you have to immediately put a stop to it and confront every single thing they say, because once they plant enough dishonest misinformation, they will be believed as gospel despite the mountains of evidence to the contrary. So every time that bitchy co-worker goes into the boss's office to complain about you and everyone else in private, you and everyone else is likely being found guilty with the luxury of knowing the accusations or the chance to defend yourself and clear the air. Do the exact same thing they do, or it will become gospel and pile up until it's a gigantic steaming pile of shit about you. HR is the worst. They only ever act in the company's interest or their own. In this case, they didn't want to be bothered and decided one of them had to go. They probably fired the nice one because a report of a weapon threat was an easy reason to fire her. Subscribe for more hot Reddit takes in your inbox, guaranteed.